Okay, let's get right back into it, right where we
Yeah,
left off.
frustrating. So, yeah, there's a checkpoint and a settlement. So I was saying it's kind of starting the story in the middle. Like, of course, the guy branding a knife, shoot that guy, fuck that guy. That's a terrorist. But you have to look at what is creating that entire situation. You've got one group of people who have colonized and maintained ethnic segregation in Jewish-only cities protected by a standing army and a wall that's not even on the demarcation line. It cuts into the West Bank and annexes territory. That's why you end up with people brandishing knives at checkpoints. And the fact that they go through checkpoints is another thing you have to acknowledge, that why is there a checkpoint and a military inside some civilian area?
So, I mean, to answer you, I'd go before that. I think that it's not what came first, the chicken or the egg, because in my opinion, the chicken came first, and the chicken in this case is the reason that these checkpoints are there are because there have been so many security issues within these territories that when Jews and Arabs live together, you'd have stabbings, you'd have bombings. I mean, let's go back in the early 2000s, the bus bombings of innocent civilians, the Sbarro bombing, the stabbings they were taking place on a daily basis. And these things,
suicide bombings ended in 2005. Yeah, then it switched to rockets.
They were the early 2000s, the late 90s were suicide bombings. Then it switched to rockets, correct? And these were
the death count's about 100 to 1, though.
The thing
as far as Palestinians getting killed.
Yeah, civilians. But you can't look at death counts, because when there's an action, there's a reaction, and that's just physics. That's simple.
Yeah, and I'm saying the reaction is getting racially colonized is why there's terrorism.
So I say that the racial colonization happened because of the terrorism. From my own experience, from what I've read, from what I've seen, because if you go and look at 1979, you look at Begin, Israel in their entire existence, all they've been looking for is some way to maintain peace, some way to maintain some sort of land that everybody can live in. There's always been this idea in Israel of land for peace, land that Israel has taken or won in a battle. There's always been this idea that every Israeli prime minister has looked.
Yeah, we forcefully took this land. Why you mad?
Well, listen,
you forcefully took the land. I mean, of course they're mad.
Israel has never, or not. I won't say never, but I'll say never. Israel has never started a war with any other country. Look at 48.
1956, 1948, and 1967. They started all those wars.
I disagree.
1956 was a false flag. They tried to blame it. They had Israeli agents bombing Western targets in Egypt. This is Operation Susanna, or the Lavon affair. The defense minister, Pinhas Lavon, was taken to trial and thrown to the wolves for it. And it didn't matter, because in 56 anyway, Britain, France, and Israel attacked Egypt preemptively based on a bogus attempted false flag that fell apart, and they still did it because the British wanted to keep the Suez Canal.
So we'll take out 56.
This is important because this leads to 67, because Eisenhower stepped in and said, hey, knock it off, guys. And they put UN peacekeeping troops in there for 10 years. And that lasted from 1957 to 1967. And 2 weeks after they were removed, Israel attacked again, blowing up Egyptian planes while they were still on the runway. And at that time, Egypt was helping the Yemen independence movement against Saudi Arabia. They're already in a war. They didn't want to start another war, and Israel seized that opportunity to start the Six-Day War.
Yeah, but the Six-Day War was started when a coalition of Jordan, Syria, and Egypt attacked Israel.
No.
Israel took out the plane.
The Six-Day War started with the Israelis shooting down 6 Syrian planes prior to any of that happening, and then bombing the Egyptian Air Force.
Which, the shooting down of the planes, the bombing of the Air Force. So, the shooting down of the planes was due to Syria invading the airspace and Syria initiating an act of war, which predicated shooting down the planes. And
well, according to our
attack,
intelligence ship, it wasn't that way. But then again, the Israelis tried to sink the USS Liberty, which was in the area, which could have proven such a feat. And they tried to sink that boat, even though it was an American ship. And they originally blamed that on Egyptians. But because people survived and said, no, it was the Israelis attacking us, they had to change their story and say, okay, we did attack the ship, but we thought it was an Egyptian boat, despite the big American flags and everything else. And then 2 of those pilots even came out and said, no, we knew it was an American ship. One of them refused to fire on it even. He got thrown in jail. They knew.
So
they actually attacked the intelligence ship in the area, gathering information on who started what and all, even though it was American, and tried to blame it on another country.
So the actual start, though, and according to history, the actual start of the Six-Day War was when Egypt mobilized in the Sinai Peninsula.
That's the Israeli propaganda. That's not history.
That's on Wikipedia.
Wikipedia is not an encyclopedia. Anyone can write on Wikipedia.
Correct, but
I've talked to Jeff Gates and people who are there. I mean,
yeah.
We was talking to Dagan in the office, and the Israelis came to him and flat out said they were bombing the Egyptian Air Force. That's why the alarms, he said all these alarms and things were going off, and just, shouldn't we go somewhere? And they're like, no. They're just putting them on.
So according to history, according to
Egypt
the way
is already at
the
war in Yemen. They're not going to start a war with Israel.
Listen, according to the annals of history, and I go by history, I'm not making anything up. According to the annals of history, the Six-Day War was predicated by the mobilization of Egyptian troops in the Sinai Peninsula, which was considered an act of war. And then due to that, there was a preemptive attack, which is allowed in every sense of what war is. There was a preemptive attack on the Egyptian Air Force.
Right. So
keep that Air Force grounded.
But what we can agree on is you can say they're mobilizing their forces on the border or something. So we preemptively struck. But Israel struck first.
Everybody agrees it was a preemptive attack on the Air Force, but everybody agrees that the act of war was predicated by the mobilization of the troops
they can
on
say,
the Sinai Peninsula.
They can say that while they were building troops on our border, we said the same thing about the first Gulf War. So, Saddam's gathering troops on the border of Saudi Arabia, even though Russian satellite photos disagreed, and we invaded, and the whole babies on incubators and all that. It was bullshit. I mean, you get official narratives, but you have to question these official narratives, even of your country, like I did with the United States. Like, we found out later, like, the babies on incubator speech was coached. It was Hilton Knowlton, and Iraq was not amassing troops on the border with Saudi Arabia. That was lies. Now, Egypt may or may not have been doing that. Let's say they were doing it. So you have to have a preemptive strike. It's Israel striking first, physically shooting first.
So the physical shot was shot first by Israel in response, because what country is going to have another country's troops mobilize on their border and say, yeah, okay, attack us, and then we'll attack you back? Because also
Israel's troops are already on the border. That's what I'm saying is
all troops are on every border.
The peacekeepers were there from 57 to 67. Now, clearly, Britain, France, and Israel started the war in 56. There's just nothing debatable about that. The moment that those peacekeepers were removed, Israel went into Palestine, which then put them on the border with Egypt. Prior to that, the Palestinians had been the buffer zone, and the UN peacekeepers had been the buffer zone. Once they're removed and Israel comes in, then they're face-to-face again.
What are you considering Palestine? When you say Palestine, just give me the border.
That would have been like Gaza on the southern side of the border to Egypt, obviously.
So the border to Egypt borders Israel proper as well. The Sinai Peninsula borders the southern city of Eilat.
I know.
So that's not Gaza.
Right. Part of it is in southern Gaza, and the Sinai Peninsula had troops in it on Egypt's side and on Israel's side.
I've been in Gaza and I've been in Eilat, and there's a very large stretch of land which is just Israel.
I know, it's a majority.
It's majority Israeli property.
But Gaza's the one on the coast.
Gaza is the one on the coast, that's correct.
Yeah, which is where the Navy and everything is. It's important.
The Israeli Navy's not there.
I know. But it will be if you're allowed to have that territory again. It was this year.
Well, that territory is a whole other ballgame because there are many things wrong with that territory and how it's being used currently. That's a whole different story. It's a whole other debate. We could probably have another time, but I'd assume we'd both agree, as we're both.
But anyway, Israel shot the first, preemptively struck Egypt in 67. They started the war in 56, and the Europeans and the Israelis did not start the war in 48 physically, but definitely the cause of that was an influx of European immigrants. Yeah.
48 was started by every other country other than Israel. That's 100%.
Well, I would argue the British started the war.
Again, not started by Israel.
No, it wasn't. 48 wasn't. The rest of them were, though.
Right. So 56 will agree to disagree that there's maybe a theory. There's a theory out there that, you know, there was the whole thing with the British, whatever. We're not talking about 56 right now. We're going back to 67. 67 was started with an act of war by the Egyptians on the Sinai Peninsula, which was responded to by the Israelis with an attack on the Egyptian Air Force to not allow the Egyptian Air Force to get off the ground. Simultaneously, however, Nasser from Jordan and Syria invaded the northern border of Israel.
Yeah, they'd already shot down Syrian planes.
Which was another act of war by the Jordanians and the Syrians, which, according to the annals of history, which I guess you have some sort of issue with, according to the annals of history, were in cahoots with Egypt to come from all sides and squish Israel.
Yeah, I know what happened in the war. This is what happened. Israel preemptively struck Egypt. They gave some reasons and said, oh, they're mobilizing their forces or whatever. But they preemptively struck. If Egypt's really going to strike, they're not going to have all their planes sitting in a row on their Air Force ready to be bombed. And the U.S. or Israel is using European technology and U-2 planes and everything else to do this feat. They preemptively struck and wiped out Egypt. They reoccupy Palestinian lands. And, of course, all the Arabs fight back.
Which Palestinian lands did they occupy?
All of it.
Which Palestinian land?
The West Bank and Gaza now.
So Israel doesn't occupy Gaza at all?
Not now. That was removed in 2006.
Correct.
We're talking about from the 60s to then. I mean,
well, they didn't occupy. They took it.
Right. That's worse.
Just like America took America.
Yeah, and that wasn't right either.
Okay, so we can talk about not right, but we're talking, you know, all
America did that.
Fair in love and war.
Centuries ago. I think just like centuries ago, people had slaves, and centuries ago, people treated women like property. We agree that those were bad, and we're trying to change those things. You don't justify your current behavior by saying, well, hundreds of years ago, other people acted just as nasty as we do.
I'm not trying to justify it that way. Again, like we spoke about this to me, I'm not going to justify something by saying, you know, you don't point at somebody and says, oh, he did it or he did it. Like, you know, that's not the way I'm trying to justify. I'm justifying it as it was a war and we took something, you know.
I got it.
It's not like we went in, you know, guns blazing, brandishing knives, going, hey, get the hell out of here, you know, this is ours. No, you attacked us, we attacked you back, and we defeated you.
No, you mobilized and we preemptively struck you, which you can still argue that, no, you just attacked us. Because they waited until the UN forces were removed. They were there for 10 years, from 57 to 67. You're talking weeks after they're out of there, Israel has a war again.
Or you could say Egypt, or you could say Syria, or you could say Jordan has a war again, because they all had a war again. It's not like Israel just went crazy and started attacking everybody.
Israel had attacked them in 56 first, clearly, and as soon as the Americans, UN people are gone, they attack again.
Well, we said the British was 50. We agreed not to leave 56 out of this because we said that may have been a British thing, not necessarily an Israeli
think they were aligned. Obviously, they had an alliance. The British wanted to keep that buffer on the Suez Canal and control that for their own interest. But you can't separate these things because that's what I'm saying. Israel isn't independent. Israel is an acting wing of British and U.S. imperialism.
Well, what I'm saying is in 56, if we're going to bring it up, what happened was a British attack to keep their interests alive, and then due to that spilled over into Israel proper, which allowed for a war to take place between the the Palestinians or the Arabs and the Jews in Israel.
So they're doing it together because you have Israeli agents bombing Western targets and framing the Egyptians for it. And then somebody's bomb went off prematurely in his jacket before he reached the movie theater. He was going to blow up. And they searched his house, and they figured out what the plot was. I mean, they literally – I mean, the Brits – I'm not saying the Israelis were blowing up Western targets without the British knowledge. The British knew. They were just like, hey, give us a pretext and we'll blow the shit out of Egypt. That's the kind of thing that went down. And they did. But the Americans stepped in and said, look, knock it off, separate it, because America doesn't have an interest in the Suez Canal as much as the British do. They're too far away, et cetera. They're messing with Panama and their own mess. They said, okay, we'll put this, we got this new thing, this UN, we'll put peacekeeping troops there. And weeks after they're removed, there's another conflict. I mean, it was the only thing keeping them from fighting each other was the UN being there and the Americans. But after 1963, the Americans were full on board and on with the Zionists. So there was nobody left to come referee. Once the Americans were on board with Israel, there's been nothing to stop it.
Nothing usually stops America. We can. Again, we're not talking about America, because America, we can bring up Iraq, we can bring up Afghanistan, we can bring up the Gulf.
They had the same story with Iraq, though. They're like, Iraq's amassing troops on the Saudi border, and they were not. But that's what Iraq, they said, like on television in 1991.
Yeah, but Iraq was also to take out the terrorist forces there, and to, I mean, there's a lot of talk in every single war, and there's always going to be people condemning it, and there's always going to be people against it. There's always going to be people for it.
The second Iraq War was absolute disaster, and it was based on deceptions.
It was absolutely a disaster, and it was absolutely based on deceptions. I actually wrote a thesis paper on the Iraq War. I agree with you there.
Where are these deceptions coming from?
Listen, man, if
coming
we're going
from
to
the Office of Special Plans, which is comprised completely of dual citizens with Israel, and based on Israeli policy papers.
If we're going to go full conspiracy theory here, which
it's not a conspiracy. The Office of Special Plans was in the Pentagon. It's outed by our own analysts. I'm not one of these conspiracy kooks.
No. I wasn't calling you that.
Secretary of Defense.
All I'm saying is you can't blame the Iraq War on Israelis or on Jews. You just can't do that.
I wouldn't blame it on Jews, but you can definitely say that was for Israeli policy papers and yes, there were Jewish neocons, but that's not the Jews. I would never say that. But these neocon planners, the architects of the war, have a specific origin, which is traceable, that doesn't require any speculation or conspiracy. There was an office that was not supposed to exist, an office within an office in the Pentagon called the Office of Special Plans, where they sat there and cherry-picked and fabricated evidence to create a war with Iraq. That was its sole purpose. And it's the defense policy planner, Richard Pearl, Douglas Feith, Paul Wolfowitz, the same guy who was involved with Iran-Contra, which also involved Israel and the United States against Nicaragua. These people have been working together for a long time, and it does have a specific origin. And the reason I'm bringing all that up is because I think Israel is not aiming at peace, because you can't simultaneously colonize your neighbors and act like you want peace. Because if you really wanted peace, you wouldn't colonize people. So that is the reason, if you talk to Palestinians, like why they're so upset, is because there's ethnic colonization in the West Bank and a large blockade on Gaza. That is the source of their recruitment or what have you. Then there are other people who are just like Islamist nuts or whatever, like there always are.
So let's talk about right there. Now, I'm going to make my point about my main point, I guess, now about why Israel does want peace. And throughout the years, let's say we're going to go completely with a let's say here. We're going to go from 48, 56, 67, whatever you want. Israel, premeditated, went in. They started the wars. They started the fight against all these nations, just for a let's say. All right. But what happens after every single war that Israel fights, after every war that they go in and take land, within the next 5 to 10 years, Israel always has okay, we understand that you're upset, and we understand that, now you're terrorizing us and you're carrying out attacks against us. Why don't we give you this land back? And even more on top of that, because if there has been the idea in the 90s that Israel was willing to give back almost 80%.
Yeah, if you look at that generous offer by Ehud Barak, it's not that at all. They maintained all the waterways, highways, etc. It was not a generous offer whatsoever.
It was a generous offer because all the
We'll give
Arabs were
back a
looking
portion of the
for.
land we stole from you is not a generous offer.
I wouldn't say stole because stealing means that it was taken
Forcefully.
without knowledge. That's not stealing is
All
not
right. Well,
forceful.
we forcefully took from you then.
Right, forcefully, but it wasn't forcefully because both sides fought and both sides had an opportunity to win,
So
which
it's
is
might makes right in your idea as well. If I'm stronger, I can have what I want.
no, but I do believe again that the the 48 and 67 wars in which Israel took the most amount of land were initiated by other countries. And when those other countries initiate, in my opinion, if you are defeated, you don't just pull back. No country has ever defeated with the idea of going in to take land and to stop terror and then pull back. In fact, when countries go in and they win, a territory, just like in the game of Risk, you win a territory, you move your troops in. However, different than in the game of Risk, Israel, every single time they've had a war and every single time they've taken, has gone on to say, hey, you know what? We're going to give it back to you in an act of good faith, in an act of good grace. We're going to give you more than we should. More than we should would even be an inch of land back. However, we're going to give you more than we should. We're going to give you everything you have back, and we're going to give you full autonomy in those places because the Palestinian people do have full autonomy in Gaza and in the West Bank. However, the reason that Israel maintains a military presence and the reason
They
that
don't have
Israel
full autonomy. They have Jewish and Arab roads. It's segregated. Their high schools are segregated. They're
in
not allowed
Gaza,
to trade.
in
Gaza has a
Gaza,
blockade. They're not allowed to trade with any foreign countries or bring any
why do,
materials into the
why does
country.
Gaza
And
have a blockade?
they're
Why does
routinely bombed back into the Stone Age.
why does Gaza have a blockade?
There's a blockade on why does Israelis blockading Gaza? They don't want
Why
Gaza to
is there?
prosper. They're benefiting off of the $2 an hour labor from
Okay.
Palestinians.
Okay, so that's where I would say you're wrong. The reason there's a blockade on Gaza, there wasn't always a blockade on Gaza. However, the blockade on Gaza started when the rockets started and when the terrorists were coming out of Gaza and blowing up Israeli civilians, carrying out terror attacks within Israel. There's for every action, there's a reaction. When you do something wrong, you get punished.
Okay, well,
The
the
blockade
rockets
is a
started.
punishment.
I understand that. I know what you believe. We're always just reacting and defending ourselves. And I'm saying it's bullshit because Gaza used to have settlements as well. And the American Road to Peace didn't remove those settlements. They relocated and paid for them to go to the West Bank, giving these religious zealots like $55,000 a piece, put them in their own house, swimming pool, and everything else, in land that was confiscated, forcibly taken from other Palestinians. And then Israel attacked Gaza and leveled it, and they specifically targeted their agriculture, blowing up chicken farms and things that have nothing to do with like military targets, and then put a blockade on them that counts the calories that can come into the country. Israel fears the Arab demographic overtaking the Jewish demographic. They don't
Yeah.
want to lose their majority.
No. I mean, listen, man. I've been part of the conflict. I am, in every sense of the word, a realist. I'm not sitting here as a person who loves Israel, with that flag, and I'm not sitting here as someone who's sitting here. I'm a Zionist, and I believe I'm right. I am open to everything. I'm open to
Well, do
hearing
you
every
think
side.
that racial segregation and settlements is not making the problem worse?
So, so that's where I was going. Let me get there. As someone who's been part of the conflict, as somebody who's been shot at, had IEDs blow up next to him because of the conflict, who's lost friends, who's had friends get injured because of the conflict, I think I can really take a step back and look at it from an honest and a realist perspective because I've also talked to the other side. I can tell you within the 17 days that we were in Gaza during Operation Protective Edge, we had Gazan citizens come over to us begging us to take them back to Israel proper because of the absolute
Because it's safe.
desolation.
Yeah.
What?
Because it's safer there.
No, because of the absolute desolation that they were receiving by the hands of Hamas, which is the ruling party in Gaza. Hamas, and this is a known fact, is known to take more than 60% of Palestinian
Yeah.
labor
Hamas
and money.
sucks. They're a government. Hamas was
Hamas
supported initially
is
by
awful.
Israel as to offset the PLO. Israel supported Hamas. It's the
Because the
monster. It's their
PLO
own
was
Frankenstein. It's their own Frankenstein.
The PLO is a terrorist organization, and it turned right into Hamas, which is now a terrorist. It's a recognized terrorist organization. Hamas is a recognized terrorist organization. That's
Yes,
not
I know.
out of my
You
mouth.
know, if the world were to be fair and legit, the CIA would be considered a terrorist organization too, and so are the Israelis. All these governments, intelligence agencies that assassinate people, squirt poison in their ears, blow up hotels and stuff, they should also be considered terrorists. But the CIA is an intelligence agency, and Mossad is an intelligence agency. But if you look at what their behavior, just based on their behavior objectively, they're all terrorists.
Well, I just want to answer one guy that just commented, Rosa 1465, who
Oh, we
said,
have comments? I didn't even know.
"Yeah, man, I just noticed that because I heard like a little pop, and I was like, oh, comments, cool." Rosa 1465 says, "Everyone agrees Hamas is evil. Can we leave them alone and talk about the rest of Palestine?"
No, you have to talk about Hamas.
Yeah, you have to talk
as a
about
government.
Hamas, exactly, and also not everybody agrees Hamas is evil, which is a crazy idea, but not everybody agrees that they're evil.
Not everyone thinks the American government is evil either.
Correct. Not many people. There's always disagreement everywhere. So Rosa 1465. That's why we're talking about Hamas. Thank you for your point though, because obviously we hope
Hamas is not the Palestinian people either. I mean, it's like the American government invaded Iraq. I wouldn't want New York to get blown up because we blew up Fallujah. You know, because New Yorkers didn't do that. The government did that. Like 70% of the Americans opposed the war.
Listen, religious zealots aren't their religion. Meaning you can't go tell me that a Muslim extremist is Islam. Because like I said before in our first video about, an hour and a half ago, I have an absolute respect for the Islamic religion. I think it's absolutely a religion of peace, and I think it's a beautiful religion. And I'm
it
not
can be a religion of peace. Yeah. It can be. Its religion is as religion does, like I said. And the point I'm getting at is that for large established foreign forces like the United States and UK purposely fostered religious fanatics on both sides. Zionist Jewish fanatics on one side, Sunni Muslims, this is in Saudi Arabia and Jordan, etc., because they want them to fight each other. They don't want a resolution. Perpetual conflict is perpetual profit. They don't want them talking to each other. They love the blockade. They love the settlement process because that's it. You can never resolve a religious conflict because it's based in fantasy land. And there's people who do, not you, but there are people who really think God's a real estate agent and he gave all this land to me. And
God doesn't have time to do real
craziness. I know, but well, the devil would be a real estate agent, but or a lawyer.
The devil's fucked up, man. We don't have to bring him in.
There's the funny joke is God and the devil are in some kind of argument, and God said, "I'm suing," and the devil laughed and said, "Where are you going to get a lawyer? They're all in hell."
It's a good one. I like that.
So do you think the settlements are defensive or what?
Well, the settlement is a tough point because if we're calling them settlements, generally has a negative connotation.
I call them racial colonies, but I was being neutral by saying settlement.
Right. So racial colonies definitely has a negative connotation.
Well, it is a racial colony. It is exclusively for a particular race, and it is a colony.
So what would you say about Ramallah or Jenin? What would you say about those? Are those racial colonies?
Then they're not colonies because they're already there.
Are those racial?
Are they racially exclusive? I'm not sure. Is it the law there to be racially exclusive because it's already the Israeli law anyway?
Jews or Israelis are not allowed into that town. If you step foot into that town, you will be stoned, shot at. The Israeli military is not allowed in there. It does not police.
Well, your military shouldn't be allowed in someone else's country. Jews not allowed is fucked up, but your military not being allowed, like, so what? I wouldn't want Chinese military in California or something.
Obviously, that wasn't my point. My point is that Jews and or Israelis are not allowed in there to the point that Israelis and Jews, not all Israelis are Jews, but Israelis and Jews have stepped foot in there and they're lynched. I mean, to the point that they're paraded around on the backs dragged around on the backs of motorcycles through the town. That's pretty fucked up. I think you would agree with that also.
Yeah, that happened once.
This whole... It's happened a lot more than once.
It's
that
racial
know of.
segregation is retarded,
So
and
that's what I'm saying. The racial
I
segregation
understand the
is
fear there
everywhere. It's
is
everywhere.
because usually a settlement starts with some zealots going and they put up some tents or something, or they just build a road and knock down some olive trees. But if you don't do something, then there'll be a city there. There's an encroachment on land, and I'm not picking sides. I'm saying both sides are
Yeah,
idiots in this.
that's
Where the, the, the
that's
difference
where we
is the Jewish
differ.
side has bigger guns and ends up one taking the land. But it's the side with the bigger gun. It's the stronger side's decision to have peace or not the weaker side. The weaker side has to fight. The strong. It's up to the mightier side, the side with more guns or with more money and
So
both
let's
that
break
can
that down.
create peace.
Let's break that down. In 2014, when I was still in the IDF and I went into Gaza as part of a ground attack in Operation Protective Edge, I would say that that Israel. Well, first of all, that was premeditated by the capture and killing of the three boys in cold
Yeah,
blood in
one soldier and
Operation.
two boys were captured in the West Bank. So why was
No,
Gaza?
three boys. No soldier.
Yeah, he was 19 years old.
He wasn't a soldier though. He was it was a religious kid who was in a
Oh, he
yeshiva,
wasn't. Okay.
religious seminary.
All right. Well, three
Yeah,
teenagers get kidnapped by a group and killed, and
yeah.
you start a war over it. It's
Wait,
like
wait, no, no.
if
So
someone, hold on, if someone in Canada came to New York and killed three people, we don't go bomb Toronto.
okay, so now we continue. That happened. Israel was contemplating a military response. I can tell you that because they mobilized us. I was I was actually 500 meters away from where they found the boys. We were on that mountain. We were called in to aid with the search. Um, Regardless, we were mobilized and we were told that potentially a ground invasion may occur. And then they told us no because there isn't, like you said, there is no reason to attack Gaza when this is a West Bank operation. This
Well,
happened in the
it's
West
not
Bank.
even a West Bank operation. It's some criminals who are in the West Bank. You can't collectively condemn the
So
whole area based on what some kidnappers did.
you're right. I phrased that wrong. By
Okay.
West Bank operation, I mean something that happened in the West Bank. I'm
Sure,
not
something
saying
that either way is dumb. Like something happened in the West Bank. Let's invade one of them. Let's invade the area that didn't even occur in. Like,
so. Let's break down why the invasion or the ground operation occurred. The ground operation occurred, I believe it was 35 days after the teenagers were found, and that's because the rockets within 2 days of the boys being found, the rockets from Gaza started flying into Israel, and the mortars from Gaza
all right,
started
hold on.
flying
You
into
skipped some
Israel.
steps though, because prior to the
What I
rockets
skipped?
being fired, between the kids being found and the rockets being fired, the Israelis had murdered Palestinians in the green zone and in the blue zone, and they had killed people. I think 300 meters from the southern border. They had killed 72 Palestinians that year prior to the kidnappings versus zero
Who did they murder? I want to know who they murdered.
Palestinians who got too close to the wall.
So
They
I will
murdered
tell
two
you,
farmers. That was in October. I
yeah.
remember
So
reporting these
this
things.
is this
This
is
is 72
actual.
people died. You can say every single one of them were knife wielding terrorists or something.
I'm
72 to
not gonna say
0.
that. I'm not
Then
gonna
there's a
say that.
kidnapping in the West Bank, and Gaza gets invaded.
Gaza. Okay, so you just skipped a whole bunch of steps. Now let's break down from a military perspective why people can get killed. Okay,
People were
why?
shot at a funeral.
Okay, now from a military perspective, let's break down why, or the IDF rules of engagement. Okay, the IDF rules of engagement do not allow for indiscriminate fire. Just the opposite. Even in Gaza, even during a ground operation, we were not given orders to fire unless fired upon. To that degree, to the point that we would not shoot to kill unless a person was in a certain distance from us and posed an absolute direct threat pointing a gun at us. If you're running at me with a knife from 150 meters away, I cannot open fire on you because you do not pose a direct threat to me.
Yeah, I
So
wouldn't.
I can I've been on the Gaza border. I was stationed on the Gaza border. People come, touch the fence, and run away all the time. And what do we have to do? We mobilize. We go to the fence. We check to make sure an ID wasn't placed there, and we go away. There's one time a year that a bunch of Gazans will run to the fence and try to break the fence down, start lobbing Molotov cocktails over, will place IEDs, will potentially breach the fence, and those are the people that are fired upon. Nobody is fired upon indiscriminately, so I wouldn't say that 72 people were murdered. But now that we got that point out
Some
of the
of
way,
them may have been throwing Molotovs, but there were people shot at a funeral. They murder people to create
when did this
an
shooting
agitation.
when did this?
See,
Okay, so
I'd have to look it up again because that was many years ago. But I
yeah,
remember seeing it. I
please
remember
look it up.
reporting it prior to knowing that this operation was going to happen. I'm sitting there reporting, yep, the Israelis killed some Palestinians again. This time at a funeral. They're shot. What was the point of that? Whatever.
So
It's
please
like
look
the
it up.
kids
But I
being
also,
killed playing soccer. You know, this is some
I
kids
want to
playing
question
soccer
you on
hit by a
something.
mortar round from a ship. You know, they know.
I want,
You
I
know?
want to, I want to, I want to question you on something though. You are a person that very much wants to break down. I watched one of your videos on YouTube on 9/11, and you very much dig into news reports, and you believe that a lot of news reports aren't factual; they're maybe fabricated. So why do you so firmly believe
I don't
that
think news reports are
these?
fabricated.
Well, you're saying that there's
I'm
something
using
behind it.
news reports. I use all primary sources and news reports for my 9/11 arguments.
So, but why do you believe 150% factually take it at face value that IDF forces or Israeli forces indiscriminately fired on a funeral and killed innocent civilians?
Well,
Why do
I
you
mean,
believe
it's
that
hard to
news
fake
article?
such an event. You've got bodies there and
I'm
everything.
not saying fake the event. I'm saying why don't you potentially believe that either A, there's something more than what was being reported, or B,
Because it wasn't even contested. I mean, they're
every,
not saying no. They were shooting throwing stars at us or whatever. Like
I, well, I want
they
to,
routinely.
I want to
If
see this
you're
article. One second. What was it? Palestinians killed at a funeral. 2014.
I don't know.
Clashes erupted at the Palestinians funeral.
It happens so much that I'd have to have time to look. I'm just telling you based off my memory that there were several incidences of Palestinians getting killed before any rockets were fired. And the rockets, how many people die from the rockets
So
before and after
if you
Iron
want to talk
Dome?
about innocent people.
Oh, shit.
People